Hi, everyone. Welcome to the virtual breakout session of Z3 2021. Sorry, I'm very nervous and excited to be here. We're at the Futures Workshop, and I am Dr. Ilana Kwartin. I'm the Regional Director of the Western US for the Jewish Agency for Israel. And I live here in Los Angeles. I oversee all of our work on the West Coast. We have a mishlachat of 65 shlichim here in the West Coast, and I live here with my family, with my 4 children, and with my husband, BG. We're shlichim as well. And I'm very happy to be hosting this beautiful session here at the Z3. If you're attending Z3 since this morning, thank you for rejoining the Re-Minyan. Every Jew counts. We're going to talk about campus life here. If this is your first session, then I just want to take a minute to talk about Z3 in general and today. So this is the 7th year of the Z3 conference, and this is a hybrid event. So some of you are there in person, some of you are joining us here online. The goal is to focus on one future scenario, which will influence the relationship between diaspora Jews and Israel. The utility of this exercise is to allow us to experiment with potential solutions to possible scenarios and try different approaches in a controlled and safe environment. Of course, this is recorded, so controlled and safe, you know. Earlier this day, the main plenary of the conference, we discussed a hypothetical scenario. We placed it in 2025, which is what we're going to do today as well. And we are now discussing specific developments and potential futures. Okay, so I would like to first start by introducing our panelists here. And I'll start with Aidan. So Aidan Golub is a sophomore at Harvard University from Westchester, New York, and he's the executive director of the Israel Summit. In a minute, Aidan, you can elaborate if I don't say all the correct stuff, but it's an international nonprofit dedicated to shifting the dialogue surrounding Israel on campus. Their most recent summit had more than 2.5 million views and 531 campuses across 89 countries. Wow, look at these numbers. With speakers including the president of Sudan, the Moderna CMO, the founder Star Lioraz, Waze CEO, and many more. On campus, Aidan is pursuing a master's of science in electric engineering and is actively involved in theater and Jewish life outside of the classroom. Aidan, say hi.
Thank you so much, Ilana. Good to be here. I'm excited to talk about the Israel Summit and Israel on campus in general. Glad to be here.
And my dear friend and colleague here, Michelle Rojas-Tal. So she is the program director of Israel Fellows at the Jewish Agency for Israel. She's the central shlicha to Hillel International. If you don't know, so the Jewish Agency has a program of fellows around campuses. Maybe Michelle would elaborate in a minute on the program. And it operates all over the world, not only in North America. Michelle grew up in a unique environment. She's a daughter of a Jewish mother and a Hispanic father. Michelle had very little connection to the Jewish world growing up, but during her junior year of high school, after September 11th, it led her to eventually get to Israel. So over the following years, she began devoting her life to Israel and the Jewish people. She traveled to Israel in 2004 with Taglit, Birthright. That was the beginning of the romance. And she started her work at Stand With Us in the spring of 2005 in Israel. While there, as a Jerry Seinfeld family scholar and taking part in an ambassador's training course in the Israeli Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. Michelle made Aliyah in 2007, joining the Stand With Us international team as Diaspora Education Director. She traveled to Switzerland, Hong Kong, South Africa, Turkey, Greece, North America, and Australia. I think your passport is, done. In her position and has been featured as a keynote speaker in numerous conferences and forums. In 2003, Michelle was featured as part of the Jerusalem Post's list of influential Jews, so look out for her, as one of the 6 women to watch in the Jewish world. Michelle is also a proud member of the Schusterman ROI community for Jewish leaders. She's currently living in the greater DC area with her husband and 3 kids while serving as the Jewish Agency emissaries. So Michelle, say hi.
Thank you so much, Ilana. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you all today and to share this forum, not only with my Fro League, my friend and my colleague, Dr. Kwartin, but along with Aidan, who's doing incredible work with the Israel Summit, and super excited to speak about the work of the Jewish Agency Israel Fellows, who are serving nearly 100 Hillels on college campuses across North America, and as Ilana pointed out, around the world. And it's very exciting to be in this forum to discuss some of their work and the campus space in general when it comes to Israel. So we're looking forward to this discussion.
Okay, so I think what I want to do in the first part is to hear about you, about the current situation, compared to the past, things like that. And then in the second half of this session, we'll jump into a scenario given us by Z3. But I really want to encourage everybody, if you could write to us in the chat, any question that comes up about our speakers or about the scenario, or maybe something unconnected. I mean, we're Jews after all, things are unconnected when people ask questions. So I'll start by asking you, so Michelle, you have a little bit of more years on Aidan in terms of being on campus, but if you look at the trends on campus today, how was it 15 years ago? How does it compare to today, now that you're overseeing it and seeing like all the campuses? And then Aidan, I would love for you to talk about today as well.
Thank you so much, Ilana. So the only problem when your bio is being shared is that all of the years are in there. So then everyone is calculating your age. And once you hit the mark of having 3 children, it starts to really matter. So yes, indeed, the campus has changed, but the conversation has definitely remained the same in many, many ways. One of the things that you pointed out, Ilana, and that from working so intimately that is very important to me is looking at who the Jewish student is today on a college campus, right? Where are they coming from? Where are they coming into the conversation in terms of Jewish community and obviously in relation to Israel? And so I am a millennial. There are not a lot of things about me, by the way, that are very millennial. It's very funny, but that's technically the generation I am a part of. But when we look at millennials, approximately 50% of Jews on college campus who are like me during that generation came from hybrid homes, meaning one of their parents was not Jewish, the same way that my late father of blessed memory was not Jewish. And today that number is approaching 80%. That is the highest estimate. So the vast majority of Jewish students on college campus today are coming from complex backgrounds, coming from a background where one parent is not Jewish. So they are coming into the conversation many times a bit later in the game, and obviously from a more unique background, meaning their identity is already complex by nature of who we are. And so I think it's really a critical factor when we're looking at how we're approaching the conversation about Israel today, understanding that the vast majority of college students, Jewish college students, are not necessarily attending Jewish day school, sometimes even Hebrew school, summer camp. And so oftentimes, once they get to campus and they have an opportunity to interact with Hillel on their campus, and other like-minded Jewish organizations or Jewish sororities and fraternities, for many of these students, this is the first time that they're able to do that and really dive deep into their Jewish identity and their connection to Israel and what that means to them. So I think just as we're kicking off, we have to be in that mindset before we dive into the conversation, because I'm so excited, as I shared with Aidan when we were preparing with the call, to share this forum with Aidan, because the conversation is, as I said before, I think the same in many ways, but the students and who the students are different. And that is okay. And that's exciting. And I think it offers fantastic new opportunity, but we have to understand that. You pointed out, Ilana, I was 16 years old on September 11th, 2001. I remember that day, so clearly, everything about it, every moment. And obviously it influenced a lot of who I became and of my entire, not only my college experience, but my career, quite frankly. And so understanding the different experiences, both those that are shared and those that are different across the generations, is also a critical factor when we're talking about the conversation surrounding Israel and Jewish community on campus today.
Aidan?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump in. I think the best place to start is probably talking about my background and how I got involved with the Israel Summit. I grew up going to Jewish day school. I was the president of my Jewish day school, so it's something I was incredibly passionate about. And going to campus, I was like, I'm not going to be involved in Israel advocacy. It's what I did kindergarten through 12th grade. It's everyone I was surrounded by. But when I get to college, I want to branch out and do other things. And clearly I didn't do a very good job sticking to my word, but it wasn't a random thing. It was very quite purposeful, and really motivated by a necessity and a sense of responsibility. And when I got on campus, I was blown away by the experiences that I had and the anti-Israel sentiment that was occurring on campus. And going to a Jewish day school, my parents and my friends' parents and my teachers, everyone would talk about experiencing this anti-Semitism, this anti-Zionism on campus. But what I experienced in person was out of control and was way beyond what I was seriously expecting. I remember my first semester, freshman year, there was an event on campus for the anti-Israel group. And you would think at a place like Harvard, you have some of the most educated, thoughtful, nuanced students. But I was literally sitting in a room of hundreds of my peers standing up and screaming out the top of their lungs, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free and we will wipe the state of Israel off the face of the earth. And you want to talk about the blurry line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. These students stood up and they had all of these world-renowned speakers. And by the way, one of the speakers isn't allowed in the United States anymore because he's on a terrorist watch list, but that's besides the point. And they literally said in this meeting of all of these students, it's not a conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. It's a conflict between Jews and the rest of the world. And you're sitting there like, how is this real life? How is this possible? And as someone who, grew up with such a strong sense of Jewish identity and commitment to the state of Israel, I felt a very great sense of obligation to be involved. Not because it was something that was easy, it certainly wouldn't be, but in a lot of ways, I didn't feel I had much of a choice. And so I heard about this organization called the Israel Summit. And what really makes the Israel Summit unique is that it's a kind of a paradox in its mission statement. The goal of the organization is to engage the unengaged students on campus who might not normally be going to Israel programming. So you have your Hillels, you have your Chabads, and they're very, important Jewish organizations on campus that do this work. Stand With Us, Israel on Campus Coalition, there are a lot of them. But what they do is they focus on the Jewish community that is typically engaged and kind of gets the shtick surrounding these things. And it's very important work, and we do need to be leaning into that. But for the other 97% of kids on campus who are either not Jewish or Jewish, but don't really go to Israel, centric programming, they don't have any opportunities for real exposure outside of the politics. And I'm happy to talk about more trends on campus and some of the things that are contributing to this. But what's unique about the Israel Summit is it kind of flips that model on its head and says, how do we create a program that's appealing to those 97% of kids and just get their foot in the door, engaging with the state of Israel outside of the contentious political conversations that you might hear. So I joined this organization my freshman year. I've been, honored to lead its growth over the past few years. We did this massive virtual conference, and now we're transitioning back on campus. Happy to talk more about all of those things, but that's kind of a bird's eye view of my journey and why I care so much about this.
Thank you. As you guys were talking, right, it's all like, big and inspirational and the differences and things like that. But we can't ignore the fact that for the past couple of years, people were Zooming into their classes, not getting together, not seeing each other. And the world was in a huge crisis. So I can tell you from my point of view, and again, this is not campus alone, this is just kind of like the world, at least in the West, all the people felt during the crisis that their identity as Jews is the strongest, and they wanted to make Aliyah. People who would never make Aliyah started applying and opening files, and the numbers have gone like 3 or 4 times more than normal. So on my end, it was feeling like, oh, Israel is in the center of identity for people. But what I see on campus is usually the opposite, right? So my question is, how did it translate during those past, couple of years? Again, either Zooming in or even skipping a year, right? Some people wanted to do like a gap year or not show up to campus, like, it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time. Let me do something else in the middle. or yes showing up, or like, and I know that like the shlichim, at least in the West, they couldn't meet people in person, like on the grass or for coffee. They couldn't have conversations. So, you know, it was a huge change these couple of years. So just, you know, curious to see your input on these couple of years, and also kind of like where we are at today after, supposedly after, right? Sort of after, without the variant, you know, what are the challenges now after this period? So whichever, jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. And there's a term that I want to open up with and really hold on to, which is access. I think the unique opportunity that this and let's put it out there, the elephant in the room. This has been a very, very traumatic period for people. None of us can deny that. Each one, you know, in their own respective way and for different reasons, but we are living now alongside a global pandemic that is continuing, and so many things have been turned upside down, whether it was, you know, high school seniors graduating and looking forward to stepping foot onto college campuses, to weddings being canceled, to britot, circumcisions, and you know, bar mitzvahs taking place online. The world literally stopped. Ilana knows this well. I have not physically been back to Israel. I have not been home to see my family, and my children have not seen their family members in over 2 years. And it's very painful, and it's a very difficult thing. But when we look at, I think, one of the things that did come out of this, and you know, Aidan touched on this when we're talking about the fantastic numbers at the Israel Summit, suddenly, when it was in this model, where it was online, there was access. There was access to people from across the globe. Access includes a price point. You know, I think a very, very critical point that we need to hold on to and remember is that a lot of programming, belonging to a synagogue, going to a Jewish day school, attending a Jewish summer camp, all of those things, phenomenal, important identity building opportunities come with a price. And so I think the pandemic, when we all kind of turned into a virtual reality, it suddenly offered access into community. And I think what we are all working so diligently behind right now is maintaining that community that in many ways grew. If I were a student on a campus and didn't necessarily feel comfortable walking into the Jewish Studies building or something similar, suddenly being online, it was a very brave space and a safe place to be. And so there was no judgment. It was, you know, kind of, you could be anonymous in many ways if you chose to be. And so we saw a lot of positive things come out of that. When there was so much isolation, there was also very much the realization of how important and vital community is, being with one another, being together, celebrating the holidays, the Chagim, all of these points. Ilana spoke about, you know, remaining on the ground. The shlichim, the emissaries of the Jewish Agency, remained on the ground across the globe. And I think it was critical for us to be together with our respective communities. And the same goes for the Jewish Agency Israel Fellows on campuses. They remained on their campuses. I have fellows who were literally by themselves for 3 and 4 months, alone, completely alone, isolated to their apartments, but they wanted to ensure that they were there with their students experiencing this together. And I think for the very reason that Aidan touched on is because we don't want Israel to just kind of be packaged in a political conversation. Israel's human, Israel's a story, and we want to encourage others to write the chapters of that story of what it means to them. And so actually going through this pandemic together with our communities allowed us an opportunity to dig deep into other issues. All of a sudden, there were these shared values and shared experiences that were not you as an American and I as an Israeli, they were us together in this moment. And so that is a takeaway we have from going through this, and what we are trying to do is hold on to that community building, continue to encourage it. Now that we have the opportunity to be together in many places, once again, in a physical space, there was nothing more exciting than watching students eating sufganiyot on Hanukkah. I mean, it's all of a sudden these little things that matter so much, the getting back to basics. And I think as we are now living alongside the pandemic, these are the moments that we want to hold on to and the takeaways we have about community building and connections to Israel.
So just a quick one, Michelle, before I let Aidan also answer that. So, this is beautiful, and we're online, and people are participating, and they could be anonymous. They could join up in a different name, not show their face on video. Brilliant, amazing. But all of the Taglit was canceled, right? The Maccabi task is not going. People are not seeing Israel, not meeting it when they're supposed to. These are crucial ages. People are graduating without having seen Israel, right? If these were like the couple years of their, finishing, or they are leaving campus for a gap year and maybe not, coming back. It seems that we're losing people or losing opportunities in a sense at the same time.
So I think that pause, which is how I like to look at it, the pause that we had really allowed all of us in our joint work to kind of review, right? I mean, is Israel the first place that many students, and I think Aidan can share this about his fellow students way more than I do, but even I remember myself as a student on campus in New York, Israel wasn't the first place students were going for study abroad. No way. They wanted to go to Spain. They wanted to go to Barcelona. They wanted to go to Germany, all of these incredible places. No one was thinking about Israel. And so I think in this moment of being on pause, this kind of time out that we were forced into, it kind of allowed us the opportunity to really review what we had been doing up until this point. How are we creating the most relevant experiences for our students? How do we get better? How are we encouraging that same access to as many students as possible? And so I think as much as the Israel experience, and there's no doubt about it, Ilana, you spoke about my romance with Israel. Ilana knows that my romance with Israel for my birthright trip was like a literal one and a figurative one, because I met my husband on my birthright trip. So it's like it was a literal romance that began, but it was that chapter one. And so having this time out and still being in a fingers crossed that end of December trips get to go off to Israel, we also saw how many students now having that pause, and that it's not a given, oh, I'll go birthright next season, or I want to wait till it's warmer. It's now, no, we have this opportunity. We want to be together in community. There is no replacement for Israel. Ilana knows this, Aidan, there is no replacement for that immersive experience, but we just had to get super creative with creating alternatives for that. And I hope at the same time that we are returning to Israel physically and bringing groups back, that we won't forget some of that creativity and that access for other communities that maybe will not have that opportunity even once things are in a better place.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm studying for my physics final tomorrow. And so I'm going to speak in physics terms because that's how I've been thinking. But over COVID, you saw a tremendous rise in a kind of potential energy, right? So you had these organizations that were running programming, but it wasn't very outward facing. You don't have tabling in the middle of campus. You're not engaging students, with different programming. The Jewish kids are going to seek out, pro-Israel programming that's engaging to them, and kids who are involved in anti-Israel groups might go to those programming, but you're not really affecting the larger community. And so it was a little bit quieter in that regard on campus. But now that you're back, you see all of that, increase in potential energy turn right to kinetic energy. And as soon as we've gotten back on campus, there's been a huge boom in activities, in clubs, and all sorts of programming, because kids have just been dying to get back on campus and have all this, pent up energy and excitement. I think it's manifested in two ways that have been amplified over the course of COVID. The first is in this intersectionality that we talk about a lot, and especially on these college campuses, that are very activist focused, very, liberal, progressive places that advocate for certain causes. They all support one another, and anti-Israel sentiment has become tied up in all of this. And so, for example, at Harvard, a huge movement on campus is divesting from fossil fuels. And at all of the divesting from fossil fuel events, you have divesting from, prison groups and the prison industrial complex. You have divesting from the state of Israel. And when, the Harvard Out of Occupied Palestine group has an event, it's co-sponsored by all of these groups that have nothing to do with the state of Israel. Sometimes, in a bit of an ironic way, like all the LGBTQ groups hate the state of Israel and want to support, the other countries in the Middle East that don't have anything close to the LGBTQ rights. But that's kind of the way it works with a lot of these groups that band together over something that they think is, social justice in the same way. So that's kind of one thing that I'm seeing. Another trend that's really on the rise is in terms of the very thoughtful and smart strategies that are being used to delegitimize the state of Israel. So there's a huge China conference that happens at Harvard every year. No protests. It's a great event. It's very exciting. There's a Russia conference. There's a Brazil conference. All of these different countries have these big events on campus, and no one protests because they're like, okay, every country has issues. China might have issues going on. They certainly have issues going on, but we can take an opportunity to celebrate the culture and the history of a country, recognizing its complexities and deep history and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to the state of Israel, it's not the same. You have an event supporting the state of Israel, and everyone comes to challenge it. And it's purposeful, because if you can take an entire country, if you can take the entire state of Israel bursting with history and energy and culture and all these things that we love about it, and you can reduce that entire country to one political issue, it's very easy to then delegitimize and write off the entire country. And I think those two factors I've been seeing in the rhetoric and in the activity more and more each year that I've been on campus.
So as you talk, I mean, Michelle was way more hopeful than you in the first part of her speaking, and then you said, about the current situation. So I have to say, first of all, I'm very happy my kids are not going to college in America. I don't know what that would have done to their, Jewish identity or identity in general. But I can tell you that from going through a search for high schools right now in Los Angeles for our oldest, all the parents in tears, okay, are coming to those school events asking, are these 4 years going to make my kid strong enough to get into an American campus and to face these, these demonstrations, these organizations, and so on. And so, if we're talking about 2025, that's when those 14-year-olds right now going into high school are going to be on campus, right? And so I'm not jumping into our scenario today yet, but I am saying that a lot of parents are scared. And I also been hearing parents saying, you know what, we're giving up on the West Coast, the whole area here. We're just not, I mean, the campuses this is horrible. Okay, we're going to do whatever we can do at home. We're going to tell our kids to suffer through it. We'll talk about it later. There's a lot of, everybody's given up, I feel. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you feel the same, but kind of like the preparation for the next years, again, not because of COVID, because of, I think, a combination of everything that has happened, from the riots last year through Guardians of the Wall this year, and through all of the other events that happened simultaneously with the world crisis. People are losing hope again, and at least here, I see it in California with parents that I speak to. So maybe if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think I'll push back on that a little bit. I go to one of the most progressive colleges in the entire world, surely, in the country. And it's quite challenging with regards to the state of Israel at times, as I'm laying out, but I love it. I'm incredibly happy. I couldn't love this school more. And I love the Jewish community. I wear a Star of David, on my neck. I wear it out. If it's not a college shirt, if I was wearing a sweater, you would see it and it would be very cool. But I have never felt any sort of discomfort or resistance because of that, being proud of my Judaism. My friends always joke it's kind of what I lead with. It's my primary personality trait and something that I'm so proud of and so proud to represent the Jewish community. And even with regards to the state of Israel, I mean, we have an obligation to fight for what's important to us. And, throughout our history, and as it says in the Torah, there will always be an Amalek in every generation. There will always be something that seeks to persecute the Jewish people and denigrate and, delegitimate them. And we have an obligation to stand up for that, and not in a way that's, negative and hopeless. I think we've seen a lot of excitement from students on campus. And I think the very fact that in a few years, we've been able to build the Israel Summit from just a club at Harvard to this international organization. And the response that we've seen from students has been unbelievable. We did a recent summit about a month ago now. Yeah, just about a month ago. It was our fall summit, and we had 10,000 live views, and we had students directly from 30 different universities that organized big watch parties surrounding this on campus. And the fact that throwing this together, we can have 10,000 views, and this was for most of the clubs, the biggest Israel event that they did all semester, just goes to show that there are students that are dying for this on campus and looking for that sense of engagement in a way that makes me very hopeful for the future on campus.
So I think, Ilana, I try to keep the pessimism until the end. I'm just kidding. The truth is, I'll tell you, and it may sound a little bit unrelated, but literally something that happened today. So my daughter, who's 8.5, she was looking at the website of her school. I think she was trying to access like her reading group or something. And for whatever reason, whatever she had pressed, she was brought to the page of Holocaust studies. So obviously she goes to a Jewish day school here in Rockville, Maryland, and it goes all the way through high school. So there's like a dedicated page to Holocaust studies. And she began to ask me questions. She said, "What is this a picture of?" And it was a picture of some students in Auschwitz. And one of the students had an Israeli flag around them. And so, you begin to tread lightly on what this topic was. And in our family, on my mother's side, we lost 100 members of our family during the Shoah. And I actually have a picture of my daughter with my late second cousin, who was a survivor of Dr. Mengele when she was a baby. And I showed her the picture, and, we began to slowly speak about it. And something that keeps me, as cliche as it may sound, so this amazing Jewish day school that my daughter gets to attend here while we're here as emissaries, every day they have the drop off and the pickup, Israeli music blasting. It's hysterical. Like the principal always has on like the most, and whatever like the newest hits are in Israel. And at first I didn't think anything of it. I said, well, there are a lot of Israelis here. That's fun that he has like this music playing. But what I realized is the approach is all encompassing. It's holistic. It's about celebrating our Jewish identity before anyone is dictating to us what it is. And I think in the atmosphere of identity politics, that is very much front and center here in the United States. And I think, in many conversations, not only in Israel-related conversations, right? Within families, we all, hear the divide politically. So many issues are not spoken about at the Thanksgiving table, at the Shabbat table, because, this group of people thinks that way. And if I offend my uncle and whatever in my own family, when I think about it, I think about there is so much divisiveness around certain conversations. And so I think what is critical is that it's not just waiting for the oy vey moments, as Professor Gil Troy, one of my mentors, how he refers to it. It's not just about the oy vey, it's about when we're saying, oh yay. Like, who are we as a community? What does that mean? I think, Aidan, you put it so brilliantly. This is, everyone surrounding me knows this is a part of who I am. Growing up, I went to public school my entire life in New York. All of my best friends from childhood. If any of you remember United Colors of Benetton, it was a company, and it was always very important for them to show a very diverse group of models in their advertisements. So I always joke that we are the United Colors of Benetton. None of us comes from a similar background, religion, ethnic makeup, none of it. But my Jewish identity was always front and center. And so I think what we have to remember, and I don't want parents to be discouraged, as we say in Hebrew, the absolute opposite. And I tell this to parents all the time who say, oh, I want my kid is thinking about this campus, thinking about that campus. I want you to look for a campus where there's strong Jewish life. I want you to look for a campus like Harvard, where there's the Israel Summit. I want you to look for a campus where there's a strong Tamid chapter that's also looking at Israel beyond the conflict. I want you to look at all of these things that will help encourage and make sure that we are building strong Jewish life and presence on college campuses. And at the same time, I'll insert the optimism through all of the very difficult scenarios. A lot of student activists do begin to, just as you pointed out, Aidan, it was for me as well. When I heard some of the things being said in my classroom, I couldn't remain silent. And it wasn't because I came from the strong Zionist background. I knew it was wrong, and I knew I had to respond to it. And that's kind of how the journey began. But I think all the while, all of these things are happening on campuses, and some, you have student governments that believe that they're essentially the United Nations, and creating a very negative atmosphere for those who have an affinity and love for Israel and connection to Israel on college campuses. Look what's happening in the Middle East, right? There are direct flights now out of Tel Aviv to the UAE, to Morocco. So the rest of the world continues to move on and move into a positive direction of building relationships, having, great diplomatic progress. And so that's what we need to be reminding our communities of as well. Let's follow that lead and not listen to the naysayers, because they're always going to be there. If we speak to parents and grandparents who are on campuses in the 60s and 70s and 80s, they will say, yes, we had the naysayers as well. We did as well. But we have to keep celebrating and ensuring that our students have that strong identity and, you know, are not backing down in the face of the anti-movement.
Okay, I'm going to address a few questions that are popping up here in the chat. And also we'll get into our 2025 scenario maybe in a minute, or maybe not, we'll see. But it bothers me, I guess, when you talk. So I'm a very optimistic person by virtue of who I am and everything, but it's just this like arena of campus life and the arena of what's happening in 2025 on campus, or what's going to be the challenges. So this is kind of like what I'm gathering again from my point of view. So first of all, I feel like this generation doesn't get educated about matters around them, and they base their opinion very, very quickly. And again, if there wasn't a strong high school education, they go into campus pretty much a clean slate, and then whatever comes faster, stronger is the thing that's imprinted into their knowledge base, right? And so a lot of people would say, oh, I know nothing about Israel, so I won't base my opinion until I visit, or until someone says, otherwise, or until I read social media. So that's, one piece that I hear. And another piece, I think we heard it in a lecture with Rachel Fish, is that she said the algorithms that are showed to the 18-year-olds and to the 20-year-olds isn't the ones that are showed to the 40-year-olds. So we don't even have a clue of what's kind of like what is the wall showing them, or like kind of like what's the news they're picking up. And obviously no one is reading newspapers. Everybody's reading social media, fast, quick. And there's something about the Israel story that is long and deep. And it's just too much information. It's too much to learn. It's too much to educate yourself. It's way more, it's faster and easier to just kind of like go along with these things around you and be influenced by them. And then, one of my shlichim comes to their Hillel and says, I want to do Kabbalat Shabbat Israelit, like an Israeli Shabbat program. What do they say? You can do a Shabbat program, but drop the Israeli, right? And this is a Hillel on campus, right? In the university of today, like, a couple months ago. So I'm just saying that the reality as it is today, and, tell me what happens in 2025 if that's the reality today, if this is what I'm hearing.
So look, I think there are certain campuses where the situation is so fragile, right? That there is concern about even what would seem the most mundane or obvious of things to take place. There's a lot of sensitivity around them. And I will go as far as to say there's campus climates in certain places where there are threats, there are active threats. And I think we find ourselves at the horseshoe, right? Whether it's things that go on from the far right or from the far left, it's like we are kind of stuck here in the middle in terms of this anti-Semitic, anti-Israel hatred that is happening. And, there is a need to, in many ways, I think, rebuild. And maybe that's kind of our outlook and our attitude in general, kind of as we're now living alongside the pandemic and what will hopefully be a post-pandemic reality soon enough, is we have to kind of reinvent. How many students would identify as a Zionist today or even use that terminology? I'm asking that as a rhetorical question, right? And I think part of the reason is, what does it even mean? It's that same point you were making, Ilana. It's long, it's complex, it's political, it's this, it's that. Do I start speaking about Dreyfus? And where do you begin? Literally, where do you begin? But I think if we have a conversation about home, about community, about identity, about belonging, and one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about leading the shlichim, the Israel Fellows on campus, is because their identity is already complex by nature of who they are, right? And so when you're able to show, I think in a very real and raw manner, that is okay, right? That you can hold multiple truths together, it becomes almost like a shield, right? Where we're in Hanukkah, think about the Maccabees, think about that strength, right? And so it becomes this magen, it becomes a shield against someone then dictating to you, you don't have a place here. You cannot take part in the LGBTQ plus programming or this group because you are a Jew or because you are a Zionist. But if I know that there are spaces and there are places where I can absolutely hold those multiple identities all in the same manner and be proud to do so, then you know what, maybe I'm going to get up and I'm going to form a new group. And I won't necessarily need to buy into something that's being dictated to me. We have to bring our community back to a place of holding our heads up high, right? Of ensuring that who we are as Jews, who we are as Zionists, can be put in the door, right? That it's not an access point question. How do you identify? I would never be not allowed into a space as a Latina woman. It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. And that's the mindset I have whenever I address Jewish students on campus, right? It wouldn't be acceptable. So I'm not going to allow anyone else to dictate that to me. So I think all the while things are weary and there are a lot of questions about students, and this is not an apathetic generation. I want to repeat that again. This is not an apathetic generation. They are a passionate generation. They are a generation that cares about a lot of causes, but oftentimes, right? Like you said, it's very easy to then kind of get wheeled into what it seems like all of your friends care about and what everyone else is doing. So what are we doing that's going to be new and different and exciting, that's going to reinvigorate them and make them want to be a part of our community? And I think that is about holding our heads up high, doing the work where we are showing them a part of Israel, a part of the Jewish community that they may not have thought about before, and also inviting their friends, their non-Jewish friends, into that conversation to kind of be a part of this, reinventing of sorts and look forward into the future.
Yeah, I think it's a great question that Michelle asked of where do you start in the conversation, because it's so complex, and also not only for your own understanding, but for your ability to explain it to others. How do you frame it in a way that's palatable? Because otherwise it's overwhelming. You're gonna talk about the Peel Commission and you're gonna lose people. I saw a question in the chat about how do you engage, students or your children, depending on who's listening to this, and asking the question of why do I get involved in issues on campus that are so divisive? And why would I even how do I lean into that? I think the best way to do it is not in a way that's specifically about knowing the most information. I always like to joke that the Jewish kids who went to Jewish day school their whole lives and have been learning this stuff for 13 years don't feel comfortable talking about the state of Israel because it's so complex. But the kid who's been on Facebook for 15 minutes is an expert in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And it's very true. I mean, a lot of my peers who I went to day school with are afraid to stand up. And so it's not because we didn't learn these things, we did. And so when you ask the question of how do you encourage students, children, what have you, to lean into this, I think it's an identity thing. And that might not be standing in the front of the room yelling about the state of Israel, because that's not usually, how these things happen. It's about going to a Shabbat dinner, wearing your Star of David, lighting the Hanukkah candles and putting your menorah, in your dorm room window. And I think those small things that might not be directly related to kind of the conflict or the arguments and that kind of stuff have a much greater impact, because it leads to a strong sense of identity. And then the students on their own terms come to these conclusions and come to these opinions if they keep getting their foot in the door. Because on the other hand, it becomes incredibly overwhelming, and then students' natural response is to tap out and not want to be involved because it's too daunting, and no one student wants to be in the spotlight feeling they need to defend, the entire Jewish people and the entire state of Israel.
So you're in a sense saying that with too much information is where we're failing. And so when the parents are saying, I need those 4 years to learn, or my kids to get all the information they need before they have to stand there on their own without my guard and my shield. So you're actually I'm trying to understand what you're saying. It's fascinating. It's a great answer, to answer to all these parents. And actually we have in the chat and in the questions, we have some parents. We have parents of high school students who are going to go on campus in 2025. And we also have Alex here, who has 3 kids. One already graduated, one is in college, one is on her way in 2 years. And he's asking, what can we do to help? Money, time, other. So I don't know, Michelle, if you can relate to that, and then Aidan, if you can relate to that. That's a great question. Like, what can we do now as parents?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. First of all, as parents, the first thing you can do is have a conversation. And by the way, when I say have a conversation, don't even have a conversation about Israel or about Jewish identity. Ask your kids what they're interested in, what's important to them, what's important to their friends. What are the things that matter to them? And I say that in the most genuine way possible, because I think once we start having those conversations the same way on campus that we are telling Jewish students, and I know something that we work diligently with the shlichim on, with the emissaries, is that you can't just show up in a space, right? Because you want to build this allyship. You need to build a genuine relationship with your peers on campus. Understand what matters to them, understand what's important to them, what issues they are passionate about. And then what we are working for is that reciprocation and that genuine relationship building. And so I think the same way between generations, we need to have conversations about things that matter to us, values that are important to us, and kind of getting our heads around that first. And I think once we are able to kind of build that base and build that deep relationship and understand that maybe there are not so many things that are different about us. And a lot of times I think it's, everyone wants to say the millennials are here and Gen Z is here and the baby boomers are there. But suddenly there are things that you can relate to, right? Think about Vietnam, right? The protests during Vietnam and that call for social justice and civic action. That's something that I think a lot of students can absolutely relate to today, and to understand, that their parents or their grandparents were a part of that conversation. And so I think what's really important as we are building out, preparing our students for campus, is to kind of allow them to be comfortable in their skin in general, in terms of their identity. And once I feel comfortable in my skin in general and know that I have that base of support and encouragement at home, then absolutely my Jewish and my Israel identity is going to become a part of that. And I'm going to want to share that with others as well. What can people do to help? Get involved with your local campuses, ask students, ask the professionals on those campuses, ask the shlichim what you can do to help. Sometimes it can be as simple as supporting a Shabbat dinner on campus, or a small retreat. All of these things that aim at community building and identity building, in order to ensure that when we have the protests, when we have the nasty BDS votes, when someone is writing that article, I will be so secure in my identity and who I am that I'm going to want to go out and respond to it. So I think it's really important to have those conversations, have that genuine relationship building happening at home, because that is where the identity starts. And then once you get onto campus, it will be a lot easier for students to kind of grasp onto the Jewish part and the Israel part.
Absolutely. And Ilana, I want to give you a more specific example of what I was talking about before, and how to engage with the conflict and educate your peers. And this relates to how we build our content for the Israel Summit. And it's something that we've thought a lot about over the years. How do we create content in an hour and a half for students that can educate them? And what we found is the best way to educate students about the conflict, and students of all backgrounds, non-Jews, unaffiliated Jews, what have you, is to not talk about the conflict at all. And you're going to say, how does that make any sense? And what we do is it's all built around the strategy of showing and not telling, right? Like what we learned in high school English class, but having people not stand up and say, let me tell you about the conflict. Let me tell you about history. Let me tell you about, how Israel is so great for the LGBTQ community, this or that, but rather bringing perspectives that tell their own stories that might reveal nuggets or pieces or stories about the state of Israel. And it's completely apolitical, completely nonpartisan. When we have politicians speak, and we have many prominent politicians speak, we're very clear that they don't talk about internal Israeli politics. They don't talk about the conflict. They could talk about the importance of the existence of the state of Israel, the relationships between the United States and the state of Israel, how crucial that is from an economic standpoint, what have you, their personal stories and anecdotes about the state of Israel. I remember one time last year, we had former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, speak, and he said some really beautiful, phenomenal things about the history and the politics from when he was Prime Minister. And I ultimately removed it. And I agreed with everything that he said, and I thought it was fascinating and powerful. But what you often find is that when students hear about the politics and they get uncomfortable, and if someone disagrees with one thing that someone says, they immediately disengage and shut off. But on the other hand, if you can have people bring their perspectives, and you can have, the first winner of the Miss Trans Israel competition speaking about how she grew up in another Middle Eastern state and then moved to the state of Israel, and what that was like as a trans person, as an Arab, as a Christian, that's incredibly powerful. if you could have Amari Stoudemire, this basketball player that they remember, when he was playing on the Knicks, talking about why he moved to the state of Israel, why he converted to Judaism, and how diverse, the community in Israel is as a Black Orthodox Jew, that resonates with students incredibly well. And the last thing that I'll touch on is it's impossible to do the politics and the history justice in such a short amount of time. And so if you do it, there's no choice but to cut corners and to skip over certain things in a way that won't even properly educate someone. And so that's kind of how we build our content. And that's really how I think about, even when I'm talking to my friends, how do I explain and really show them what the state of Israel is?
So thinking about what the both of you just said, about building the strong identity beforehand, or about not talking about the conflict, or just kind of like showing positive presence of the Israeli identity. So again, I'm thinking ahead, right? 2025. So there's many organizations on campus today that we know that operate within the space other than Hillel's. And then I also know that, I think, Michelle, you said it in our preparation, in terms of how many students do we reach on campus and how many students we still want to reach. Like, I don't even remember the percentages, but I want to say we reach third of the Jewish students on campus, maybe out of in every campus that we're at, actually, and we're not in all campuses that we could be, right? So how do we increase the reach? Do we want to increase the reach? Do we want, even how do we operate in this space? And then in terms of organizations, right? Like, I think there are going to be just more organizations in 2025 and not less, right? So it's going to be even more confusing, like, where do I go? Where do I belong? Which, event of whom am I going to go and listen to? So how do we operate in this space that's going to happen soon? And how do we reach all these students? And I'm also glad, Michelle, that you said that this generation is not apathetic, because this is the worry. So as involved students, and I see the ones in high schools now, and these are our future students, they're going to come on campus. We want to be able to reach them. They're going to have all these organizations in front of them, and maybe speak a little bit of what exists today, what's going to be in terms of organizational arena in a few years, and how do we create this reach.
So I'll jump in, and I want to throw an idea out there that I know we encourage strongly on the campuses where the shlichim operate, which is, I want to move away from the term tent, and I want to kind of give a visual of sitting around a very large Shabbat table, and an Israeli Shabbat table. And why do I say an Israeli Shabbat table? So both of you can probably relate to this. In Israel, so the minhag, the tradition, when you are making the blessing over challah, when you're making hamotzi, is Israelis throw the challah across the table, right? Ilana is shaking her head, and Aidan knows this. So like, we throw.
Yeah, when people come here with a knife.
I know, they're like, this is wild. What's happening? The pretty board and the knife matches the board, and it's a lot. No, we take the challah, we throw it at you. And the reason why I always share that with people with excitement is because when you come to sit around on our Shabbat table, you are coming to literally break bread with me. And when you come to break bread with me, it's me welcoming you into my home, right? So this hypothetical Shabbat table that we're looking at college campus in 2020-25 to be about is welcoming everyone around that table. I know there was a question here from Marcy about engaging with the J Street students on campus. Yes, it includes engaging with J Street students on a campus. It includes students from the right, students from the left, students who, have no wings because they are vegans. Whatever your alignment may be, whatever your ideology may be, whatever point you're coming into the conversation, the Shabbat table is about breaking that bread together, understanding that that is a brave space. Okay, it is a brave space where people may share their opinions. The Israeli Shabbat table can sometimes get a little bit loud, let's be honest, but everyone walks away with their bellies full, having eaten some yummy food, and feeling like their voices have been heard. And that is what our end goal is. We want to ensure that same access that we were talking about earlier, that same large Shabbat table where we are literally breaking the bread, and sometimes tones may go up and down, but we are not buying into a cancel culture that we touched on before, which is, you're going to say something I may not agree with, and I'm going to get up and walk away, because that is not at the heart and the core value of what the Jewish community stands for. right? Let's think about Shammai and Hillel, right? There is always going to be disagreement. There are going to be different perspectives, and that makes us who we are. But as we look forward to 2025 and building that large Israeli Shabbat table that is inspiring everyone to be a part of that conversation, to share their opinions, to ask the difficult questions, and maybe ask some of the questions simply because they don't know. I think that is what our end goal has to be. We have to create that type of setting and make sure that everyone feels invested in being a part of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I would love to add is in response to one of the questions Ilana mentioned and we saw in the chat of how do you help? How can you get involved? You're listening to this and you want to support your students. What do you do? There's a lot of things to do. And I think in a lot of ways, there's not a wrong answer. If you're asking that question, you're already part of the solution. But one thing that I would like to highlight is how to invest in student leadership. And obviously, if you want to check out the israelsummit.org, you can email me, we take donations, all that good stuff. But my real point is about, there are a lot of Jewish organizations on campus and there are a lot of Jewish professionals, and it's important and it's great. But a lot of time it becomes quite saturated, and there are certain student organizations that are student driven that are doing really incredible work, but often these students don't really know the best way to get the resources and support that some of these more storied institutions have. And so if you see a student-led Jewish organization, an Israel organization on campus, I think those are the places to lean into. I'm happy to throw my contact information in the chat for everyone to tell you more about certain organizations that I love. The Re-Minyan movement is an amazing student-led organization that's happening on campus. The Israel Summit's doing great work. We also see Jewish on campus, which is a student-led social media movement. And the big thing about these organizations is even if they might not be as efficient, as the Hillel International that's been around forever, there's something so important about leaning into these students and how they're looking to solve this. A, for the impact, because they often have the best finger on the pulse of what's going on in their campus. And the second thing is it sends a very powerful message to the students that are trying to be a part of this. We need the support of the community behind us to be successful, and that momentum only builds on itself and creates that positive spirit on campus of change.
So just Aidan, because you mentioned it, first of all, Aidan, I do want you to put in the chat all of the organizations that people could even read about, look into. Maybe all of these names are not familiar to everybody. And then Michelle, if you could put in the chat also some links to Hillel or to the Jewish Agency, how to get involved, because people really are seeking, you feel so helpless when you see the situation, you just want to do something. So if you could put it in there as a resource, that would be great. And of course, all of these things can be found online. So I think we're heading the end of our session, and I didn't even get to the 2025 scenario, but I think we got the point, we got the idea. I'll try to sum up in my own words just for a few seconds, and then Michelle and Aidan, if you want to kind of like add your own closing comments in light of the Hanukkah light and things like that, that would be great. So I think I came in thinking that it's hopeless. I really did, in all honesty, from everything that I hear and experience. And I was happy to hear that there is so much going on campus that not all of us know. And B, that you meet all these strong students with a strong Jewish identity. And the fact that you want to instill the Jewish identity first, and not even the knowledge, about the conflicts or how to battle it or how to answer it and things like that, or Aidan's approach of not even bringing that in the front of the conversation, but other issues. And I think in this kind of like liberal era, and I think after a couple of years of not getting together, not meeting in person, all of these opportunities, like you said, a wider Shabbat table, right? Because we allowed so many people to get online, either showing their face and name or not, right? We got this kind of like wider reach. We have this opportunity now to take this whole kehilat, this whole big community that we've created online or hybrid throughout the COVID era, and to do good things together. So we really created this. I don't know. This is a different world, and we're as young people, as millennials, as students, and campus life in general is something moving very, very quickly, very fast, and adjusting to those changes. It's actually sounding very hopeful to the people coming from high schools into the 2025 class. So for me, it was fascinating to hear the both of you. And I would love to hear maybe a few seconds from each of you if you want to kind of like close up this, last day of Hanukkah, this last light out of the 8 lights that we've lit together, and to share some words.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in really quickly. Thank you, Ilana, for a really interesting conversation. To everyone for your really poignant questions. And I know that Aidan, myself, Ilana, we're happy to follow up with any questions or particular issues offline as well or after this. So I just want to say the 8th night of Hanukkah, and we're looking at the future. And I think while we are looking forward, and there was also a really important question in there that I know we didn't have time to get to, which is a conversation about the indigenous nature of the Jewish people and our connection to this land. And I bring that up because we just marked on November 30th, the official day commemorating the expulsion of Jews from across Arab lands in Iran. There is an official international day to commemorate this. And on my children, who are a hybrid mix themselves in many ways. So on my husband's side of the family, his grandparents came from Iraq. And I dedicated one of our candles earlier this week, and I wrote about it on Facebook to his grandparents and to their story. And I share that because our future is only as good as us knowing our past and celebrating our past and recognizing our past. And I think when we look at who we are educating about in terms of Jewish heroes, Zionist heroes, whether it is the incredible story of the Jews of Ethiopia and the heroes who led the community out of Ethiopia across the desert, whether it's the Jews of Iran, Iraq, and beyond, the Jews of the former Soviet Union, the incredible, inspirational Natan Sharansky. I know that he was here earlier today. We need to ensure that we are celebrating and educating about the leaders and the stories of our communities across the globe, and ensuring that students know that as we look forward, so that they too know that there are so many individuals that they can connect to and hold on to, and that will inspire them. And then when it becomes a question of the indigenous nature, or were we really connected to that land, there is a plethora of stories that they will know and be proud of, and also be inspired to tell their own story through. So as much as we are looking forward with excitement and who is coming around the table with the respective challenges that we have, because we have plenty of challenges in the campus space, let's ensure that as we are writing that story, we are also celebrating these rich figures in the very, very diverse history of our community and the diverse present of our community, and ensuring that the next generation is being inspired by who are true heroes. And so I celebrate them and I recognize them all on this final night of Hanukkah. And as we look forward with, a breath of optimism, let's make sure that we are doing that as well.
Absolutely. Something that I heard once and stuck with me is that the Jewish people get stepped on and then they apologize for being under the foot in the first place. And that's something that I experience a lot. And I think it's the nature of Judaism as compared to other religions, that we don't proselytize, and it's not our goal to, be looking to spread the Judaism to the masses. But as a result, what happens is that we have a PR problem, and we're not always so good at standing up for ourselves and thinking about narratives and spinning dialogues in a way that's as productive as possible. And the people that look to detract from us are very strategic and very efficient and have done an incredibly impressive job objectively in their goals, however hateful they may be. And I think as a result, it's incredibly important to be doing this, to be redefining constantly what Zionism means, what the state of Israel means on campus, what it means to the people in the diaspora, what it means to actually support people in the state of Israel itself, and all of the things surrounding that. So as a result, I'm very grateful for everyone listening to be a part of this conversation and to continue to engage. Even if you don't walk away with, a different definition on paper, it's incredibly important to be pursuing this dialogue and pursuing this truth. And I'm grateful to be a part of the conversation. And a big thank you to Ilana and Michelle and all the people that made today happen.
Thank you both so much. I'll say Chag Sameach, and we're nearing Christmas. So I'll say Happy Christmas to all who celebrate, and Happy Novi God to all who celebrate. This is a month full of celebrations. And thank you to Z3 for having us, for hosting us, for giving us the stage to speak about campus life. And please reach out, anyone who has questions, to any of our organizations. We're here for you. These are our names. Find us online, offline, and we'll be happy to answer or to help with any resource. So thank you, Hanukkah Sameach, and we'll see you in person. Bye.